complicated pretty quickly.
But I'll make it simple. If you don't get exposed to air pollution, if you don't get exposed to trichloroethylene, perchloroethylene, if you don't expose to toxic pesticides, your likelihood of developing Parkinson's disease is extraordinarily small. If you don't get exposed to these toxicants, your likelihood of developing Parkinson's disease is extraordinarily small. If you don't smoke and you don't get exposed to radon, you don't get exposed to really high levels of air pollution, you're just not getting lung cancer, the 90+% of lung cancer. We can stop all these diseases, the vast majority of all these diseases. There's always rare genetic causes and there's always exceptions. But the vast majority of diseases are fundamentally preventable. We can create a world where Parkinson's disease is increasingly rare. We can create a world where Alzheimer's is increasingly rare. We can get rid of leukemia, the vast majority of leukemia, I think, in children. We can get rid of lots of cancers in individuals by taking actions to improve our environment.
Let's move into the pesticide piece. And for me, the obvious thing that jumps out right away is to eat organic. And I'm sure that's not a perfect science. I'm sure there's, pesticides in the air and things get contaminated. But the way I think about it, that would give us our best shot at, minimizing our pesticides. So talk about first step when it comes to pesticides. Is it buying organic or is there some bigger thing I'm missing here?
So I'll give you some very concrete things. So by the way, before I wrote this book, I didn't know anything. I didn't know about TCE. I knew very little about the relationship between pesticides and Parkinson's disease. I had the gift as an academic of a sabbatical, and I read the great work of Dr. Caroline Tanner, one of my colleagues who's a professor at University of California, San Francisco. And we owe her a huge debt because she's done research over the last 25 years detailing the linkages between pesticides, especially a pesticide called paraquat, dry cleaning chemicals, including trichloroethylene, and other environmental factors tied to Parkinson's disease. So what can you do if you don't want to get Parkinson's disease? Yes, one, buy organic. So I do that now. I buy almost all my fruits and vegetables organic. But as you alluded to, even organic produce can have pesticide residues on them. And in fact, they do have pesticide residues on them. So I wash all my fruits and vegetables with water and a little fruit and vegetable wash, just like a little soap for the fruit and vegetables, because some of these pesticides, they dissolve only in fat, and they're fat soluble, which is what your brain is. And so they won't necessarily come off readily with just being washed. Just like, you wash your body with soap and water, you wash your fruits and vegetables with soap and water to remove fat soluble pesticides. Second thing is, if you're one of the up to 40 million Americans who get their water from a private well, I would test it. So this is chiefly in rural areas. People get their water not from city water, but from a well on their own property. These wells are bringing in groundwater from anywhere from 15 to 50 feet below the surface. Many times people in rural areas can get exposed to pesticide runoff from nearby farms. That pesticide runoff can contaminate their groundwater, and they can be drinking it. So next you should test your groundwater for it. Third, regardless of the results of it, and make sure it's being tested for pesticides. Many times when people get their water tested, they're tested for bacteria, which is not good, right? Because you don't want to get sick from an infectious disease, but you should be making sure you're testing it for pesticides. If you live in urban areas, I'd also get it tested for these dry cleaning chemicals. And then I put a carbon filter, like from Pure or Brita, or from whatever you want to get from the grocery store on my tap water, so that removes chemicals, including pesticides and TCE from it. It turns out over time, the safety threshold for all these chemicals is only made lower and lower and lower. And so I want to get ahead of the game and decrease my exposure to that. Mindful, I didn't do any of this stuff before I ended up writing the book. And then on air pollution, which we haven't talked about this, if you live in a polluted area, I would think about air purifiers. My parents live in Southern California, and for last Christmas, my kids bought my father an air purifier. So he's got an air purifier thing in his bedroom and his kitchen. My mom has the same. So I think you want to be mindful of your exposure to air pollution. We know, for example, with people with Parkinson's disease and Alzheimer's disease, that air pollution is associated with an increased risk of hospitalization with these diseases. So it might be a proxy for exacerbating or worsening the disease course. Again, we put all this in our book, Ending Parkinson's Disease, these black pages at the back. And any of your listeners for your podcast who can't afford a copy of the book, they can just email us at info@endingpd.org, info@endingpd.org with their address, and we'll send them a free copy. Our goal here is to make people educated consumers. and to change the course of the diseases, not just for our generations, for all generations to come.
That's incredible. So generous of you guys. Let's talk more about the air pollution piece. I don't want to leave pesticides. We're going to come back to that. But while we're talking about your kids buying air filters for the grandparents, what is it we're looking for in the air that we want to remove that's causing problems?
We're not sure. At least I'm not sure. I tend to think it's the particulate matter. So if you've been to LA and you can see smog, right? It's not subtle. You can see smog. And what you're seeing when you see smog is little pieces of dirt and soot that are suspended in the air. The technical term for it is particulate matter. And most of the stuff, we breathe it in and we either cough it out or we sneeze it out where it's caught in the hairs in our nose, for example, and filtered out. But some of it, really tiny part of it, some of it 1/70th the width of my hair, which is receding, 1/70th the width of my hair, can get into the nerve that's responsible for smell and go backwards into the smell centers of the brain. And hitchhiking on these little pieces of dirt and soot are those toxic metals: lead from leaded gasoline, iron from brakes, platinum from catalytic converters. And these toxic metals might be hitchhiking on these tiny pieces of dirt and soot, going in through the linings of our nose, through the nerve that's responsible for smell, and then to our smell centers. It's worth noting that the large portion of people, both with Parkinson's and Alzheimer's disease, have a loss of smell as an early feature of the disease. And the pathology of both diseases may begin in the smell centers of our brain. So that's why I'm a little concerned about that. I'd say I want to take one thing back. I think the large portion of leukemia is due to TC. I can't say the vast majority of it. I try not to overstate the fact. So I should modify my comment about leukemia and trichloroethylene. I think it's a large proportion, I think, is due to it. The book, A Civil Action, the movie with John Travolta, gives you a really good flavor of what TCE might be doing to leukemia in children.
For somebody at this point who wants to make an investment, get an air filter or multiple for the home, are there certain brands that you recommend or certain things that people should look for that the filter does to make sure they're getting something worthwhile?
Yeah, so people ask me, I probably could make a lot of money endorsing certain green dry cleaners. I already gave Brita and Pure a thing for their carbon filters. I forgot what the name of the air filter that we got for my parents, but I look for things that remove particulate matter from the air. Now, I'm a neurologist. I'm not a toxicologist. I don't have any great knowledge or haven't done in-depth things on which are the best water filters, air filters, and the like. But, if you search, like Best Buy, Consumer Reports and stuff like that, they have recommendations on best air filters. And I really got concerned, in New York City, in June, New York City had the most polluted air in the world. In June, because of the forest fires in Canada, New York City had the worst polluted air in the world, worse than Delhi, India, worse than Beijing, China. It was so bad, the levels of particulate matter in New York City in June of 2023 were on par with what the London fog was in 1800 when Dr. Parkinson's describing the first major cases of Parkinson's disease. And that air pollution is really, really toxic. On average, air pollution costs all of us humans about 3 years of life expectancy worldwide. We all live 3 years shorter lives because of air pollution. That's because of its effects on heart disease, on respiratory diseases, on lung cancer, and on stroke. But people really are not paying enough attention to its effects on cognition and on Alzheimer's disease and on Parkinson's disease. And I get really concerned that all these environmental toxicants are exploiting our nose as the front door to our brain. And if we get rid of these toxicants that we're inhaling, we'll live longer, healthier, and more independent lives.
I want to come back to pesticides. And when you were talking about them, you mentioned if we're drinking well water, how we can have contamination of that groundwater. And you also mentioned the organic produce and even washing that to be extra cautious and take care of that the best way we can. When it comes to pesticides, the other thing that crosses my mind as you talk about that is proximity to farms. And this relates back to when we were talking about dry cleaners and being in a proximity and the effects that I know before reading your book I wouldn't have thought of when it comes to a dry cleaner, being in proximity of that and the impact it can have on our health. What kind of research is there showing for people that are living by these farms where farmers are spraying and using these pesticides, the air in that area and how it impacts people?
Yeah. So it turns out great work by Dr. Caroline Tanner showed that farmers exposed to paraquat and other pesticides have a 150% increased risk of developing Parkinson's. But if you're not a farmer, you just live in a rural area, you drink well water, you're